Imagine a vast country where almost the entire rhythm of life is concentrated on only one side. Seen at night, the east glows like a lung, while the immense west seems almost to hold its breath. About 94% of the population lives in the southeast, on less than half of the national territory. The northwest covers more than half the land, yet contains only a very small share of the population. From coastal plains to river basins, cities, farms, and railways spread densely like a network of blood vessels. By ordinary logic, such an enormous territory should give people plenty of room to spread out. But vast land does not mean habitable land, because every kilometer still requires water, food, and connection. If monsoon rains, great rivers, and fertile alluvium disappeared, the East's capacity would quickly shrink as well. A city of millions needs more than housing. It needs water, food, electricity, and uninterrupted supply lines. When those supply lines fail, high density can quickly turn from an advantage into a survival pressure. Yet the East still supports crowded plains, enormous urban chains, and some of the world's busiest ports. The West also has cities and oases, but they appear like islands of life in a sea of dry land. Highways, railways, and airports now cross mountains, yet the population pattern has barely reversed. This invisible boundary is called the Heihe Tengchong Line, also known as the Huanyang Line. It marks where people have negotiated with mountains, deserts, climate, and water for thousands of years. In 1935, geographer Huanyang recognized this pattern while studying China's population density maps. He connected Heihe in the northeast with Tengchong in the southwest, creating a diagonal across the country. The line has no fence, checkpoint, or sign. It appears only when population is placed on a map. But this statistical boundary existed in nature long before people gave it a name. China's terrain descends step by step from the western plateau toward the eastern plains and coast. In the far southwest, the Tibetan Plateau rises high, cold, and thin-aired, like a roof storing water for Asia. Across the north and northwest, mountain ranges, basins, and dry corridors divide habitable areas into isolated patches. The Taklamakan and Gobi deserts create enormous empty spaces where water determines nearly every human footprint. Meanwhile, monsoon winds carry most moisture into eastern and southern China from warm surrounding seas. The farther inland one travels, the less rain usually falls, while evaporation and distance from water increase. The population line closely follows major climatic and ecological transitions between farming and pastoral life. In the east, the Yellow River built fertile plains but also forced communities to live with floods and sediment. The Yangtze forms a long water corridor linking rice fields, inland cities, and the coast. In the south, dense river networks turned low plains into continuous zones of farming and trade. The North China Plain offers broad, relatively flat land suited to both agriculture and construction. The middle and lower Yangtze combine water, fertile alluvium, and transport into a densely inhabited region. The Sichuan Basin is a major exception, deep inland, yet fertile, humid, and heavily populated. Along the coast, river deltas opened additional routes for trade, fishing, and maritime transport. More importantly, favorable eastern regions connect to one another, forming continuous corridors of habitation. In the west, habitable places are usually valleys or oases separated by mountains and dry land. The earliest communities often settled beside rivers, where drinking water, farmland, and travel routes met. On the northern lowest lands, people developed dry farming around short rainy seasons and easily worked soil. In the Yangtze Basin, water-filled rice fields turned humid plains into a stable source of food. When rainfall was unreliable, canals and ponds helped extend life through the dry season. Earthen levees and embankments appeared to restrain rivers, though they never controlled them completely. Food surpluses allowed villages to become towns, then towns to become centers of exchange and administration. Each granary acted as insurance against crop failure while supporting soldiers, artisans, and urban institutions. River ports turned waterways into roads, far cheaper than hauling goods across mountains and deserts. Canal systems linked river basins, moving surplus grain toward heavily populated cities. Over centuries, roads, canals, and rivers overlapped into an increasingly dense eastern network. Cities on plains could expand in many directions instead of being squeezed between mountains or oasis edges. In the Sichuan Basin, Terraces and irrigation transformed an enclosed landscape into a prosperous region. In the west, communities gathered water from mountains and underground channels to sustain green oasis belts. Caravan routes linked the oases, but every stage depended on wells and favorable weather. On the grasslands, herding worked better than plowing, producing mobile settlement and lower population density. In high valleys, villages sheltered from cold winds and clung to sunny slopes and narrow farmland. Nature did not prevent people from living in the West. It forced every community to choose a different strategy. In the East, local strategies gradually connected, shortening the distance between villages, markets, and cities. In the West, enormous empty spaces still separated settlements, making exchange slower and more expensive. Over time, the invisible divide separated more than terrain. It accumulated centuries of historical advantage. As states expanded, densely populated regions supplied taxes, grain, and labor to major centers of power. Household registers and granaries allowed authorities to treat population as a system to measure, move, and protect. Transport routes were prioritized where people, goods, and easy terrain already existed, reinforcing old advantages. River landings grew into inland ports where crops, coal, timber, and manufactured goods changed direction daily. As maritime trade expanded, eastern estuaries became meeting points between the interior and the wider world. Industry usually seeks labor, water, markets, and transport. The East already possessed all four. Early railways crossed flat plains far more easily than plateaus, gorges, and shifting sands. Flat land reduced the cost of bridges, tunnels, and grading, allowing transport networks to spread faster. Dense populations provided enough passengers and freight for new routes, while new routes attracted still more people. This created a cycle of accumulation. Density attracted investment, and investment attracted greater density. Schools, hospitals, and large markets clustered near population centers, drawing more families into cities. Electricity, tap water, and waste treatment made high density more sustainable than in the agricultural village era. Industrialization moved millions away from farms, but most migration still occurred within the eastern half. River deltas became continuous metropolitan regions where boundaries between neighboring cities grew increasingly blurred. The North China Plain, Yangtze Delta, and Pearl River Delta emerged as three major population concentrations. Far inland, Chengdu and Chongqing show that a favorable basin can also support an enormous urban cluster. The West has also developed large capitals, but they often resemble isolated bright nodes rather than continuous urban belts. Urbanization has made those nodes brighter, but it has not erased the darkness between them. High-speed rail has shortened travel between major centers, especially along the densely populated eastern corridors. In mountain regions, the same railway requires long bridges, deep tunnels, and constant protection from landslides and snow. Power grids, pipelines, and communication networks now reach remote regions, but they remain expensive to operate. Large systems can move energy and goods, but moving water and fertile soil is far more difficult. Every kilometer from a market adds fuel, time, and risk, especially where terrain fragments the route. In the east, parallel routes provide alternatives, so one blockage does not necessarily isolate an entire region. The Heihe Tengchong Line is therefore the accumulated result of nature, history, and a self-reinforcing network. To understand the population map, every settlement must be seen as a survival package of water, temperature, land, and connection. Water comes first because people, crops, factories, and cities all compete for a limited supply. The East receives more rainfall from the monsoon, although the amount still varies greatly between north and south. Major rivers collect water across vast basins, reducing complete dependence on local rainfall. Groundwater can support dry seasons, but overuse lowers water tables and raises pumping costs. Agriculture consumes a large share of water, so dry regions cannot sustain high density without reliable irrigation. Temperature determines the growing season because extreme cold or dryness limits both crop types and harvests. Across much of the East, warm and humid summers allow crops to grow over enormous areas. In the warmer South, some regions can harvest multiple crops, allowing the same land to support more people. The North still has vast plains, but it must balance fertile soil, cold winters, and serious water pressure. In the dry West, intense sunlight accelerates evaporation, so every irrigation canal must be carefully managed. On the plateau, cold, wind, and thin air make construction, labor, and healthcare more difficult. Deserts are not lifeless, but low natural productivity leaves both food chains and water sources sparse. Mountains cover vast areas yet leave only narrow valleys where homes, roads, and fields must compete for space. Steep slopes increase foundation costs, raise landslide risks, and prevent cities from expanding freely. Alluvial plains provide level ground, young soil, and enough room for both agriculture and urban growth. Floods once renewed the soil with sediment, even as they exposed communities to destructive inundation. Deltas combine flat land with access to the sea, allowing inland production to travel enormous distances. Access to the coast lets eastern cities import materials, export goods, and join international trade networks. Rivers can move heavy cargo with less energy than roads, especially before the age of modern engines. When rivers, plains, and coasts connect, they create natural corridors for people, food, and ideas. Flat terrain reduces the friction of distance, making the same journey faster and cheaper. Being close to markets lets farmers sell quickly, factories receive parts regularly, and shops hold less inventory. When businesses cluster together, they share workers, suppliers, and services instead of building everything alone. A large labor market helps companies find skills while giving workers more choices. Specialized hospitals, universities, and advanced services also need enough people to operate efficiently. Dense supply chains let a component pass through many factories without leaving the same urban region. High density allows infrastructure to be reused many times, lowering the cost per person. But the same mechanism also puts pressure on water, air, transport, and living space across the East. The East is not a uniform carpet of people. Mountains, lakes, wetlands, and poor soil still create gaps. Some northeastern plains once grew through agriculture and industry, but parts of the region now expand more slowly. Even east of the line, mountain ranges can remain far less populated than neighboring plains. Conversely, the West contains locally dense oases where water creates a striking exception. In Xinjiang, people often cluster around foothills, rivers, and basin edges rather than across the desert interior. Lanzhou developed along the Yellow River Valley, stretching lengthwise because mountains constrain both sides. Urumqi grew near mountain corridors and water, yet remains surrounded by vast dry space. Lhasa concentrates in a river valley where altitude remains harsh, but conditions are better than nearby terrain. These exceptions show that people do not choose east or west. They choose pockets of favorable conditions. The Heihe Tengchong Line cannot predict every village, but it describes national-scale probabilities of habitation. The invisible divide is now clearer. It marks the boundary between natural capacity and network power. Population concentration creates enormous efficiency, but it also loads too much demand onto the same plains and basins. In the drier north, cities and farms must share water supplies that fluctuate with the seasons. When groundwater is pumped faster than it recharges, the land may sink and wells must reach deeper. Urban expansion often consumes the best farmland, the very soil that once allowed the city to grow. Low plains are easy to build on, but they expose millions of people to river floods and heavy rainfall. Coastal deltas also face storms, high tides, and rising seas despite being the richest and best-connected regions. Heat, pollution, and dense concrete can turn the advantages of concentration into a public health burden. Traffic congestion can erase the time saved by short distances during hours of delay. Housing near jobs becomes expensive, pushing families outward and lengthening daily commutes. Unequal access to jobs and services can grow even inside regions considered full of opportunity. In the West, the opposite problem appears. Each road, hospital, and pipeline must serve enormous distances. On cold plateaus, frozen ground and temperature swings require roads and railways to be monitored constantly. A mountain bridge is expensive not only to build, but also to inspect after snow, floods, and rock falls. Desert cities must import water, recycle more of it, and limit growth according to supply. Pumping water across great distances or elevations consumes energy, turning every cubic meter into an economic decision. Isolated cities are more vulnerable when sandstorms, snow, or landslides block the only supply route. An oasis may be intensely green, but its boundary is rigid because water does not expand with population. Mining or tourism can create local booms, but such jobs do not always support lasting population density. When development exceeds environmental limits, dry soil can become salty, eroded, or stripped of protective vegetation. Desertification is not simply sand advancing. It is also soil losing the ability to hold water and support plants. Overgrazed grasslands recover slowly, making both livelihoods and ecosystems more fragile. Western snow and ice feed many rivers, so climate change can affect dense regions far downstream. The east is crowded because of water and sediment, yet some of that water begins on distant plateaus. The two halves are not separate. The west supplies water, energy, and resources to eastern population networks. The hidden cost of the divide is mutual dependence between where people concentrate and where resources originate. Now follow an imagined journey from the lower Yangtze to the western highlands, where the boundary becomes visible. Dawn in the east rises over rice fields, neighborhoods, factories, and railways packed close together. Within minutes of flight, villages, bridges, freight docks, and consecutive cities repeatedly fill the frame. Each railway station gathers people from the surrounding region and sends them toward offices, schools, and factories. Ports receive goods from the interior, while highways return materials to thousands of production sites. Even food moves through a dense network, from farms and cold storage to wholesale markets and urban kitchens. Density here means more than many people. It means many supporting systems within reach. Moving westward, the plains begin to fold into hills, and the distances between cities gradually lengthen. The railway continues, but bridges and tunnels multiply as the terrain rises step by step. Large fields shrink into narrow strips along valley floors, where every meter of flat land matters. Cities do not disappear, but they are separated by hours of mountains, wind, and nearly empty terrain. On the plateau, engines lose power, people tire faster, and structures endure repeated freezing cycles. Population gathers in river valleys, forming small clusters between cold, dry mountain slopes. Farther west, the mountains open into desert basins where green life clings only to water. An oasis can be as busy as an eastern city, yet beyond the last trees lies endless emptiness. Outside the irrigated belt, the land becomes dry almost immediately, revealing the true limit of water. Along the same road, every fuel station, warehouse, and hospital in the west must serve a larger area. The cost is not only construction, it also lies in waiting time and the absence of alternatives. A small school still needs teachers, and a remote clinic still needs medicine and equipment. A single snowfall or sandstorm can turn geographic distance into temporary isolation. At that moment, the Heihe Tengchong Line stops being a statistic and becomes a visible cost of survival. The boundary does not appear as a sharp cut, but as fading brightness across a living map. Extreme regions reveal what is always true. Every settlement must balance water, land, and energy. The eastern plains have alternate routes, multiple suppliers, and many cities capable of supporting one another. The west survives through strong nodes, but technology must still pay to cross the distances between them. The modern response is not to cover the west with cities, but to connect the settlements already there. Bridges, tunnels, and new railways reduce isolation, turning journeys of days into more reliable routes. Airports give distant cities faster access to medical care, urgent goods, and national networks. Digital connections carry education, commerce, and expertise across terrain that roads struggle to conquer. Strong sunlight, wide winds, and open land create new energy advantages for many dry western regions. Energy and resource industries create jobs, but usually around a few specialized corridors and centers. Restoring vegetation and protecting water sources reduce dust, stabilize soil, and extend the life of oases. Drip irrigation, covered canals, and water reuse increase production without endlessly expanding demand. Many dry cities now treat water supply as a ceiling on growth rather than an obstacle to ignore. Compact, moderate density development may work better than spreading cities endlessly into the desert. Instead of placing services everywhere, regional centers can support surrounding towns and villages. Corridor development accepts the real terrain, using valleys and water sources instead of fighting them. National transport routes help Western goods reach major markets, reducing some disadvantages of distance. Modern migration follows jobs, education, and services rather than simple instructions drawn on a map. Some Western cities still grow rapidly when they become transport, industrial, or regional service hubs. But most growth still concentrates around capitals, valleys, and oases rather than spreading evenly. Nighttime satellite images show the change best. The nodes are brighter, but the darkness remains. Smart logistics and weather forecasting make remote routes more reliable during sandstorms, snow, and flash floods. Infrastructure can reduce time and risk, but it cannot create rain or lower a plateau. The best development, therefore, means adapting more precisely, not trying to turn the West into the East. The most common misunderstanding is that policy alone pushed China's population toward the East. Policy can move investment and jobs, but it cannot command the monsoon, rivers, or fertile sediment. Another misunderstanding is that the entire East is fertile, flat, and easy to inhabit. In reality, the East also contains droughts, floods, rocky mountains, and rural areas losing population. The West is not empty either. Millions live in cities, valleys, grasslands, and oases. Low density does not mean a lack of culture or history. It reflects different distances and carrying capacities. The Heihe Tengchong Line is not a precise wall. It summarizes a broad transition zone. A village may lie on one side of the line while sharing the geography of the other. High-speed rail compresses the map of time, but the maps of water and soil preserve many limits. A shorter train journey does not make deserts, produce more water, or plateaus contain more oxygen. Even population distribution is not automatically fair, because some places cost more to sustain than they provide. The real question is not how to make every place equally crowded, but where people can live well and sustainably. The modern turning point is to stop treating this line as something that must be defeated at any cost. A more realistic goal is to improve Western living standards without forcing ecosystems to support excessive density. Water budget urbanization keeps city size aligned with supplies that can be maintained over the long term. In the East, protecting farmland preserves the foundation that once supported enormous urban networks. Restoring wetlands and giving rivers more room can reduce flood risk better than simply adding concrete. Renewing existing cities often saves more land, roads, and energy than endless suburban expansion. Remote work and digital services may help small towns retain residents, though their impact remains limited. Climate change may shift the boundary of habitability as rainfall, heat, and snowmelt patterns change. Some eastern cities will keep attracting people, while others may age or shrink. Western centers may grow selectively around energy, transport, tourism, and specialized services. Satellite data and climate models help estimate carrying capacity before roads, homes, and factories are built. Future infrastructure works best when it follows ecology, placing cities where water and terrain can support them. The population map may blur at the edges, but the core east-west contrast is unlikely to disappear. Technology changes accessibility, yet water, soil, and climate still determine the final limits of density. As sunset falls, a faint transition appears between the bright plains and the dark plateau. The east breathes through thousands of connected cities. The west breathes slowly through valleys, grasslands, and oases. That invisible divide is not a wound, but the memory of a long negotiation between people and land. People do not live evenly across a map. They gather where nature allows, then use history to widen opportunity.